a financial and moral implosion that tore down a $179 million empire and exposed the hollow core of a media superstar. And at number 10, we unravel the story of a man who promised his followers eternal luxury at a Christian theme park, but oversold the fantasy by 43,000 tickets, diverting the cash straight into his lavish lifestyle. Stay tuned, because the true ringleaders were not just a few corrupted executives, but a web of conspirators who used hush money to cover up a moral failure that was, in reality, a criminal act. Number 10. Jim Bakker, the PTL scandal, and the Golden Prophecy. The key event: the financial and moral scandal that led to his resignation, indictment, and conviction. The dates: scandal exposed 1987-1988, convicted and sentenced October 24, 1989. The crime: fundraising fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy. The mid-1980s were thick with the scent of prosperity. Jim Bakker and his wife Tammy Faye were the king and queen of this new religious frontier, broadcasting their show, The PTL Club, Praise the Lord or People That Love, to millions of homes across America. Theirs was a potent mix of emotional testimony, pop culture aesthetics, and the prosperity gospel, the idea that God wants his followers to be rich, and wealth is a sign of spiritual grace. The Bakkers were living proof of this gospel, flying in private jets, draped in designer clothes, and operating out of a sprawling Christian theme park and resort in South Carolina called Heritage USA, a holy answer to Disneyland. The empire was built on a single, irresistible pitch: the lifetime partnership. For a minimum donation of $1,000, Bakker promised his followers a guaranteed annual 3-night stay at a luxury 500-room hotel that was to be built on the Heritage USA grounds. It was brilliant. Followers were buying eternal access to Christian paradise, all while funding God's work. But the promise was a lie. The ministry's fundraising was astronomically successful, generating a massive flood of cash. Jim Bakker, however, was not building hotel rooms fast enough to accommodate the demand. The prosecution would later prove that the PTL ministry oversold these memberships by tens of thousands. They simply took the money for hotels that never existed. The internal operations of PTL were a masterpiece of opacity and greed. While followers were scrounging up their last $1,000 to secure their piece of heaven, Jim Bakker was taking home massive unauthorized bonuses. Between 1984 and 1987, the Bakkers allegedly siphoned off over $3.7 million from the ministry for their personal use, funding a lifestyle that included multiple homes, luxury cars, and air conditioning for their dog's house. The house of cards began to shake not over the financial fraud, but over a deeply buried secret from the past. In March 1987, the Charlotte Observer, led by journalist Charles Schäfer, was already digging into PTL's highly suspicious financials. But another, more explosive story erupted: the revelation of a sexual encounter between Jim Bakker and a young church secretary named Jessica Hahn in 1980. Bakker's defense was immediate and vague: a moral failure. But the reality was darker. Hahn alleged that the encounter was non-consensual. Crucially, it was discovered that PTL funds, the money donated by the faithful, were used to pay Hahn $279,000 in hush money to keep the scandal quiet. The moment the scandal broke, Bakker was forced to resign from PTL. In a spectacular show of public infighting among televangelists, rival preachers, most notably Jerry Falwell, stepped in to take control, promising to save the ministry. Falwell later resigned, stating the financial decay was too deep to fix, describing PTL's culture as one of cronyism, deceit, and outright fraud. The moral fallout was only the prelude. The financial fraud was what brought the federal authorities. In October 1988, a federal grand jury handed down a devastating indictment against Bakker. 24 counts of mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The trial, which began in August 1989, was a spectacle. Prosecutors successfully argued that Bakker had used his television pulpit to cheat people out of their money with a disdain for all those around him. The defense attempted to paint Bakker as a well-meaning but sloppy businessman. It failed. In one of the trial's most bizarre moments, Bakker himself collapsed in a fetal position under a desk in his attorney's office, later claiming to be hallucinating. The stress of the unraveling lie was too much to bear. On October 5, 1989, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all 24 counts. Just a few weeks later, U.S. District Court Judge Robert Maximum Bob delivered a blistering sentence: 45 years in federal prison and a $500,000 fine. Judge Potter's words were a condemnation of the entire industry. Those of us who really do have a religion are sick of being saps for money-grubbing preachers and priests. Bakker's fraud exposed the financial corruption at the heart of the televangelist movement. But the man who publicly condemned Bakker's moral failings with the blistering fury was about to have his own private sins thrown into the merciless spotlight. It begs the question, what happens when the loudest voice against sin is hiding a secret life that is even more damning? That answer, which involves a rival's espionage and a desperate public apology, awaits us next in this countdown. But first, if you find this dive into the dark side of faith compelling, take a moment to subscribe and comment below which of these figures you remember falling from grace. Number 9. Jimmy Swaggart, the fall of the moral enforcer. The key event: the public confession of moral failure after being exposed for soliciting a prostitute. The date: scandal broke February 1988, televised confession days later. The crime: moral hypocrisy leading to being defrocked by the Assemblies of God. The late 1980s landscape of televised Christianity was dominated by two giants, the smooth, entrepreneurial Jim Bakker and the raw, fire and brimstone preacher Jimmy Swaggart. While Bakker sold prosperity, Swaggart sold moral purity. He was the Assemblies of God minister who screamed at the devil and condemned sin with a righteous fury unmatched on television. His ministry was a global powerhouse, bringing in over $150 million per year and operating out of a massive family worship center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was the chief moral enforcer, and when the Bakker scandal broke, Swaggart was the first to take the pulpit, denouncing Bakker as a cancer on the body of Christ. Swaggart's condemnation of Bakker was merciless, arrogant, and highly visible. He used the downfall of his rival to position himself as the last, pure champion of American morality. His public posture was one of untouchable rectitude. The irony, however, was a cruel, poetic dagger that had been aimed at him for years. In the mid-1980s, Swaggart had become embroiled in a long-running feud with another Louisiana preacher, Marvin Gorman. The feud escalated to a point of open warfare, and when Swaggart launched a devastating public campaign that resulted in Gorman being defrocked, Gorman vowed revenge. Gorman hired a private detective. The private detective's mission was to follow the trail of the righteous moral moralizer. That trail led to a seedy, run-down motel in Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. In February 1988, the Assemblies of God leadership received a package. Inside were photographs showing Jimmy Swaggart entering and leaving the motel with a local prostitute named Deborah Murphy. The photos were irrefutable proof of the moral failures that Swaggart had spent a lifetime loudly condemning in others. The Assemblies of God, already reeling from the Bakker fiasco, demanded a meeting. Swaggart flew to the church headquarters in Missouri. The leadership was already preparing his punishment, a temporary suspension from the pulpit to seek repentance. But the scandal was too big to contain. The news was already leaking to the national media. Swaggart knew he had to address his massive following before the full, humiliating truth came out. On February 21, 1988, a few days after being confronted by church elders, Jimmy Swaggart took the stage at his family worship center. The auditorium was packed with thousands of weeping, stunned followers. Millions more watched live on television. It was one of the most famous and vague public apologies in religious history. Swaggart, tears streaming down his face, his voice choked with sobs, delivered the ultimate performance of contrition. He confessed to his moral failure, but refused to provide any details, leaving the specifics of his rendezvous with the prostitute unsaid. His voice cracking, he delivered the single most iconic line of the entire 1980s televangelist era. "I have sinned against you, my Lord, and I would ask that you forgive me." Then, turning to his wife, he added, "Frances, I have sinned against you, and I beg your forgiveness." The spectacle was overwhelming. The crowd was devastated, yet supportive. Swaggart's team believed the tearful confession, delivered with such power, would satisfy the Assemblies of God and the public. It did not. The church leadership was incensed by the vague, self-pitying nature of the apology and the underlying defiance. They saw the public confession as an attempt to appeal to the masses and bypass their authority. Furthermore, the prostitute, Deborah Murphy, went public, providing detailed, explicit accounts of their encounters, confirming the worst rumors. The Assemblies of God ruled that Swaggart's 3-month suspension was insufficient. They demanded he stop preaching for 1 full year. Swaggart refused, citing his duty to God's calling. The defiance was his final error. The Assemblies of God defrocked him, stripping him of his ministerial license completely. The consequences were swift. The Swaggart ministry, once an international force, was shattered. Donations plummeted, and his standing as a moral authority was irrevocably ruined. The man who had judged his rivals with the fire of the Lord was judged by his own church, convicted by his own hypocrisy. The dual downfall of Jim Bakker and Jimmy Swaggart exposed the deep hypocrisy and unchecked power at the top of the televangelism boom. It left millions of faithful viewers asking a terrifying question: if these men, who preach so forcefully about purity, were this corrupt, who could you trust? The collapses of Bakker and Swaggart were highly visible, but in the ashes of the 1980s, a new form of televised greed was perfected by a Texas preacher who promised his followers massive wealth in exchange for specific, personalized sums of money. The system was airtight, and the cash flow was incredible, until a group of tenacious critics figured out exactly how the spiritual con artist was handling the literal thousands of desperate prayer requests sent to him every day. Next, we uncover the chilling tale of Robert Tilton and the scandal of the discarded prayers. Number 7. Robert Tilton, the prayer request dumping scandal. The key event? ABC's primetime live expose revealing his ministry discarded prayer requests while keeping the donation money. The date? ABC expose aired in 1991. Ministry collapsed in the early 1990s. The crime? Deceptive fundraising, mail fraud, and preying on the financially desperate. As the 1990s dawned, a new kind of televangelist stepped into the void left by the fallen titans of the 80s. His name was Robert Tilton, and his Dallas-based ministry, Success in the Life, was designed for one thing: the relentless pursuit of money. Tilton was a master of television. His broadcasts were slick, intense, and hypnotic, often featuring bizarre, rapid-fire speaking in tongues and frenzied high-pressure appeals. Unlike Bakker, who sold timeshares, Tilton sold miracles. His core message was a covenant of exchange. If you send God a specific amount of money, usually exactly $1,000, $100, or a sum matching a bizarre personalized prophecy he gave, he would instantly bless you with wealth, healing, or a miracle. The system was an organizational masterpiece. His ministry received an estimated $80 million a year in donations and thousands of prayer requests daily, mostly from the poor, the sick, and the desperate. They were sending their last dollars, their mortgage payments, or their disability checks attached to deeply personal notes asking for divine intervention. The sheer volume of these desperate letters was the ministry's bloodline, and it was also its Achilles heel. The man who would bring Tilton down was not a government agent or a rival preacher, but a minister to the homeless in East Dallas named Ole Anthony, founder of the Trinity Foundation. Anthony was disgusted by the practice of using faith to fleece the vulnerable, and he began a meticulous, years-long investigation into Tilton's operation. Anthony and his team were convinced that no legitimate ministry could process and pray over tens of thousands of letters a week while still managing the enormous workload of a global broadcast. They suspected the prayers were being tossed, but the money was being processed. The Trinity Foundation began an operation that sounds like something out of the spy novel: dumpster diving. They tracked where Tilton's incoming mail was processed, not at the church, but at a post office box, which forwarded the physical letters to a bank in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the checks were immediately separated and processed. Anthony's team began covertly monitoring the trash disposal behind the bank. They started finding exactly what they suspected. In November 1991, the evidence was presented in a stunning national expose on ABC's Primetime Live, anchored by Diane Sire. The broadcast showed massive quantities of mail bags filled with tens of thousands of the viewers' prayer requests dumped, unread, into the trash behind the bank. The ministry had taken the checks, but the notes, the desperate pleas, the heartfelt tokens, they had been cast aside as garbage. The images of people's wedding rings, locks of hair, baby pictures, and notes detailing terminal illnesses, all treated as trash, while the donation envelopes lay empty, the money already deposited. The expose revealed that Tilton's organization used a complicated system where specialized workers were paid to open the letters and follow strict rules, remove all checks, cash, and money orders first, then discard the letters. The letters were considered simply the vehicle for the money, not the prayers themselves. The outcry was immediate and profound. The scandal confirmed the darkest suspicions about the greed lurking beneath the gospel of prosperity. Tilton attempted to fight back, denouncing Ole Anthony as a Satan-inspired critic, but the damage was done. Viewers had seen the physical evidence of their faith, their hope, and their money being treated with utter contempt. The ministry quickly collapsed. The flow of donations dried up as millions of people realized their personal tragedies had been filed directly into a dumpster. Tilton's Dallas megachurch closed, and his broadcast empire was decimated. Though he was never criminally charged for the mail operation, the public humiliation destroyed his credibility. Tilton later sued ABC, but the lawsuit was dismissed, solidifying the public's perception that the investigation was substantially true. The entire scandal became the definitive case study in how to monetize human suffering using a false promise of a miracle as the final, brutal transaction. Tilton's downfall was driven by physical evidence, a clear, repeatable transaction: money in, prayer out, letters in the trash. But the next scan was even more audacious. A supposed faith healer who could miraculously know the names, diseases, and even home addresses of his audience members, a feat he claimed was only possible through direct divine revelation. The mystery baffled audiences for years, until a world-famous skeptic and a tiny electronic device proved the truth was far simpler and far more criminal. Next, we uncovered the technical genius of Peter Popoff's deception. Number 7. Peter Popoff, the Earpiece and the False Prophet. The key event, magician James Randi exposes Popoff's divine revelation as a concealed radio receiver. The date, dramatic exposure, 1986, ministry filed for bankruptcy, 1987. The crime, fraud, deceptive practices, and exploiting the medically vulnerable. The healing ministry of Peter Popoff in the 1980s was pure theater. Popoff, a German-born evangelist, claimed a unique and powerful gift from God, the ability to receive supernatural information about people's medical conditions, personal histories, and deepest needs, which he would then use to perform faith healings. His services were televised spectacles. Popoff would point into the audience, dramatically announce a person's name, their home address, and the specific disease they were suffering from, information he allegedly could not possibly have known. He would then lay hands on the person and they would be miraculously cured, sometimes throwing away canes, crutches, or vital prescription medicine. To the viewer at home and to the faithful in the arena, this was unassailable proof of divine power. How else could he know that Mildred Johnson of 1445 Sycamore Street was suffering from a kidney stone that day? It was Popoff's irrefutable claim to authority. But to the world-renowned stage magician and skeptic, James the Amazing Randi, it was a simple trick. Randi, who had spent his life exposing paranormal fraud, was convinced that Popoff was a charlatan, using technology, not divinity. Randi and his investigative associate, Steve Shaw, began a sophisticated, months-long surveillance of Popoff's services. They used technical experts, including a crime scene analyst and an electronics whiz named Alexander Jason. The task was to prove that the voice of God Popoff claimed to hear was merely an electronic signal. The break came through relentless, careful monitoring of radio frequencies near Popoff's revival tents. Alexander Jason, using a scanner radio, finally isolated the frequency and began recording the transmissions. What they heard was not the voice of the divine. The recordings revealed the voice of Popoff's wife, Elizabeth Popoff, calmly and quickly broadcasting information to Peter, who was wearing a nearly invisible earpiece concealed in his hair. Elizabeth and her aides, having collected the prayer request cards, filled out by the audience members as they arrived, were simply reading the gathered information from a backstage area. The captured recordings were chilling and profane. Elizabeth could be heard describing a woman to Peter as that big nigger in the back, and in another instance, heard laughing uncontrollably at the medical condition of a man suffering from testicular cancer. She was giving him names, addresses, and medical complaints, all the information Peter would later pretend to receive by spiritual revelation. In May 1986, James Randi presented the irrefutable video and audio evidence on national television on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. The footage showed Popoff's wife feeding him information and then cutting immediately to Popoff relaying the identical information to the astonished audience member, all while claiming, "The Lord is giving me that name." The exposure was immediate and catastrophic. Popoff initially denied the charges, claiming the tape was doctored and his wife's voice impersonated, but the lie was simply too big to sustain. The donations, which had exceeded $500,000 monthly at the peak of his fame, vanished overnight. Within a year of the exposure, in September 1987, Popoff filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, listing over 790 unpaid creditors and debts exceeding $1 million. Popoff's legacy is a clear line in the history of religious fraud, proving that a dedicated, fact-based investigation can dismantle a powerful, deception-based ministry. The story of the fake healer remains a permanent cautionary tale about the use of technology to exploit faith. Popoff, Tilton, Swaggart, and Bakker represent the greed of the mainstream. They were selling hope and wealth for a price. But what happens when the preacher stops asking for money and starts demanding total control over your life, your children, and ultimately, your death? The financial fraud we've just explored pales in comparison to the apocalyptic violence unleashed by men who declared themselves prophets, not just pastors. Next, we journey into the darkest, most terrifying stories on this list, the cults that ended in siege, fire, and mass death. Before we dive into the darkest, most terrifying stories on this list, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us peel back the layers of these compelling, often forgotten historical events. Now, let's go back to 1978 and step into the South American jungle, where faith and terror converged in a single infamous act. Number 6. Jim Jones, the Architect of Jonestown. The key event, the mass murder-suicide of more than 900 people at the remote Jonestown settlement in Guyana. The date? Jonestown mass deaths on November 18, 1978. The crime, mass murder, conspiracy, and cult leadership leading to the deaths of 918 people. Jim Jones began his career as a charismatic, activist preacher in the 1950s, founding the People's Temple in Indiana. His message was a powerful, intoxicating blend of socialist ideals, racial justice, and Pentecostal fervor. He was a champion of civil rights, running soup kitchens and drug rehabilitation programs. He was so popular that he was a powerful political force in San Francisco in the 1970s. But beneath the humanitarian veneer lay a deep, consuming paranoia and a need for absolute control. As allegations of abuse, financial irregularities, and strange, violent, white knights loyalty drills began to surface, Jones made a drastic decision to move his entire congregation to a place beyond the reach of the media and the U.S. government. That place was a remote jungle settlement in the South American nation of Guyana, dubbed Jonestown, the People's Temple Agricultural Project. It was pitched as a socialist utopia, a land free from the racism and corruption of the United States. In reality, Jonestown was a prison camp. Life was brutal. Followers were subjected to forced labor, 12-hour workdays, meager food, and constant surveillance. Passports were confiscated. Jones, constantly under the influence of drugs, held all-night rants on the compound's loudspeaker, convincing his followers that the outside world, particularly the CIA and the American government, was conspiring to destroy them. Physical and sexual abuse were rampant. The famous White Knights became real loyalty tests, including simulated mass suicides where members were told to believe what they were drinking was poison punch, only for Jones to later reveal it was a hoax. The message was clear. They must be willing to die for their collective faith. The isolation and control were perfect, until November 1978. Concerned relatives in the U.S. convinced California Congressman Leo Ryan to lead a fact-finding mission to Jonestown. Ryan and his delegation, which included reporters, NBC cameramen, and a group of concerned relatives, arrived in Jonestown on November 17th. The visit was tense. Jones put on a show of community, but during the visit, several People's Temple members passed notes to Ryan's team, desperately asking for help to leave. Ryan knew people were being held against their will. On November 18th, 1978, as Ryan and the defectors attempted to leave the jungle airstrip near Jonestown, Jones's armed security team, known as the Red Brigade, ambushed the party. Congressman Ryan was murdered, shot multiple times, along with 3 journalists and a temple defector. It was the only time in U.S. history a sitting congressman was killed in the line of duty. The murder of a U.S. congressman was the point of no return. Jones understood the repercussions were immediate and catastrophic. Back at the compound, with the news of the assassinations reaching him, he initiated his final terrifying command. He ordered everyone, men, women, and over 300 children, to gather in the main pavilion and commit revolutionary suicide. A potent mixture of cyanide, Valium, chloral hydrate, and phenergan was mixed into a large vat of powdered fruit punch, a moment that would forever coin the infamous phrase, "drinking the Kool-Aid," though the drink used was Flavor Aid. The youngest members were the first to die, as parents and nurses used syringes to force the poison into the throats of the infants. Adults then lined up to drink the lethal brew, all while armed guards surrounded the pavilion to ensure compliance. The final audio tape, later discovered by the FBI, records the horror. The sounds of people sobbing, children screaming, and Jim Jones's voice, calm and commanding, urging them to hurry, to die with dignity. When Guyanese officials arrived the next day, they discovered a scene of biblical proportions. 909 bodies littered across the grounds. Many perished with their arms around each other. Jones himself was found dead in a chair, a bullet wound to his head, likely self-inflicted. The final death toll reached 918 people. The Jonestown massacre remains the ultimate terrifying example of how absolute power, religious fanaticism, and charismatic leadership can lead to total apocalyptic destruction. Jones had successfully engineered the murder of his entire congregation, demonstrating the horrifying consequence of unchecked spiritual authority. Jones's terror was instantaneous and conclusive, but just 15 years later, another self-proclaimed prophet, whose sect was fixated on apocalyptic prophecy and heavily armed resistance, would engage in a 51-day standoff with the U.S. government, a siege that ended in a massive fire that killed dozens of men, women, and children. The question lingers: was it the prophet who orchestrated the final fire, or the government agents who pushed too hard? Next, we journey to Waco, Texas, to relive the tragic standoff led by David Koresh. Number 5. David Koresh, Vernon Howell, the Waco Siege. The key event, the 51-day standoff between the Branch Davidians and the federal agents, ending in a fire that killed 76 people. The dates: ATF raid began February 28, 1993. Siege ended April 19, 1993. The crime: cult leadership, illegal weapons violations, and statutory rape. Vernon Howell was a young, charismatic guitarist who joined the small, apocalyptic Christian sect known as the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas. By the mid-1980s, he had violently wrested control of the group, proclaiming himself the final prophet and the Lamb of God, capable of interpreting the 7 seals of the Book of Revelation. To solidify his new identity, he changed his name to David Koresh. Koresh, citing his prophetic authority, began to restructure the sect around his own interpretation of Scripture, which included spiritual weddings. He claimed that he, and only he, was permitted to have multiple wives and children, a practice that led to him taking girls as young as 12 and 14 as his brides. He had multiple wives, and he separated parents and children, claiming prophetic ownership over the children who he said were his. These actions later formed the basis for allegations of child abuse and sexual assault. Simultaneously, Koresh and his followers residing at their compound called Mount Carmel Center began heavily stockpiling weapons and ammunition, preparing for the biblical apocalypse, which he assured them was imminent. They were manufacturing and converting semi-automatic rifles into illegal automatic machine guns. This stockpile and the allegations of child abuse drew the attention of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF. The ATF decided to execute a search warrant for the compound and arrest Koresh on weapons charges. They planned a sudden, massive daylight raid on February 28, 1993. The element of surprise, however, was lost when a local reporter who had been tipped off asked a mail carrier for directions, a mail carrier who was David Koresh's brother-in-law. The Branch Davidians were ready. When the ATF vehicles rolled up to the Mount Carmel compound, a fierce gun battle erupted. The shootout lasted for hours and resulted in the deaths of 4 ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians. The ATF was forced to retreat, and the FBI immediately took command, initiating a 51-day siege. For the next 7 weeks, the world watched as negotiations unfolded. The FBI used massive tanks, psychological warfare, blaring music, bright lights, and negotiators to try and persuade Koresh to surrender. Koresh, in return, used the negotiations as a pulpit, broadcasting sermons and promising to come out once he finished writing his definitive interpretation of the 7 seals. The siege was a stalemate. The government faced an intractable leader who used Scripture as a shield and women and children as human bargaining chips. By April 19, 1993, 51 days after the initial raid, U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno approved the FBI's final plan to inject CS gas, a powerful form of tear gas, into the compound to force the inhabitants out nonviolently. At noon, the tanks and armored combat vehicles began ramming the buildings and injecting the gas. The Davidians, convinced the apocalypse had arrived, refused to exit. 3 fires broke out simultaneously in different parts of the complex. Within minutes, the entire Mount Carmel Center was engulfed in flames. The fire spread rapidly, aided by high winds and the fuel that the Davidians had allegedly stored inside. As the fire raged, the FBI maintained that their agents did not fire live rounds and that the Davidians themselves started the blaze as an act of revolutionary suicide. Audio surveillance evidence allegedly captured Koresh and others discussing pouring fuel. The tragic result was the deaths of 76 Branch Davidians, including 20 to 28 children, and David Koresh himself. The Waco Siege remains one of the most controversial events in American law enforcement history. It was a failure of negotiation, a catastrophe of execution, and a terrible lesson in the lethal consequences of charismatic cult leadership mixing with apocalyptic religious fervor and heavy weaponry. The flames of Waco left deep scars on the relationship between religious dissenters and the U.S. government. But the control exerted by Koresh was a pale shadow of the dominance achieved by another self-proclaimed prophet who ruled an even more isolated community, a polygamist sect that continues to exist to this day. This prophet systematically destroyed families, rearranged marriages, and orchestrated the sexual exploitation of minors, all in the name of God's will. Next, we uncover the chilling, hidden history of Warren Jeffs and the FLDS Church.
Number 4. Warren Jeffs, the Polygamy Prophet and Child Exploitation. The key event: conviction in Texas on child sexual assault charges for taking child brides. The date: arrested mid-2000s, sentenced to life in prison, 2011. The crime: aggravated sexual assault of a child, and bigamy. Warren Jeffs was not a TV evangelist or an apocalyptic revolutionary, but the absolute, unquestioned leader of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, FLDS, a secretive, powerful sect dedicated to practicing polygamy after the mainstream Mormon Church abandoned it in the 1890s. Jeffs inherited the presidency of the FLDS from his father, Rulon Jeffs. His reign was defined by total, unholy authority. He claimed the power to communicate directly with God, and therefore had the divine right to determine every aspect of his followers' lives. This power manifested in a chilling practice called placement marriage. Jeffs would receive revelation, telling him which man was to marry which woman, often forcibly arranging the marriage of young girls, sometimes as young as 12 or 13, to older, established men in the church, frequently including himself. To maintain control, Jeffs used a brutal system of expulsion. Any man who dared question his authority or refused to hand over his daughter as a bride would be summarily kicked out of the FLDS community, known as being a lost boy. Jeffs used this method to expel over 400 men and teenage boys, breaking up hundreds of families and leaving their wives and children vulnerable for reassignment to other men, including himself. By the mid-2000s, this systematic abuse of authority was fully exposed by a number of brave survivors and defectors. The allegations were not simply of polygamy, they were of widespread child sexual assault conducted under the guise of religious marriage. Jeffs became one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. He managed to evade law enforcement for 2 years, relying on the loyalty and vast resources of his secretive sect, which operated compounds in Utah, Arizona, and Texas. His time on the run ended in August 2006, when he was pulled over on a highway outside Las Vegas. He was carrying tens of thousands of dollars in cash, cell phones, and 14 different pairs of underwear. But the prophet of the FLDS was finally in custody. Jeffs was initially tried in Utah, but those charges were later dismissed on a technicality. The definitive prosecution took place in Texas. In 2011, Warren Jeffs faced trial for 2 counts relating to his marriage to and assault of 2 minors, a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old. The prosecution presented damning evidence, including DNA analysis proving he had fathered a child with the 15-year-old, and disturbing audio tapes where Jeffs could be heard giving sexual instructions to his underage brides. The jury took less than an hour to convict him. On August 9, 2011, Warren Jeffs was sentenced to life in prison plus 20 years for aggravated sexual assault of a child and sexual assault of a child. Jeffs, defiant to the end, claimed his prosecution was a violation of his religious rights and threatened the court with a plague of sickness and death. Warren Jeffs is now serving his sentence in Texas, still claiming to lead the FLDS Church from behind bars. His crimes revealed the terrifying extent to which a religious leader can weaponize prophecy to exploit the most vulnerable members of society, children, under the twisted banner of God's law. The crimes of Warren Jeffs were about total control over an isolated community. But isolation doesn't always mean the American desert. Our next subject created a religious commune that served as a terrifying secret laboratory for abuse and was also deeply entangled with one of the most brutal military dictatorships in South American history. This man, a former Nazi, used religion to shield himself while he committed decades of atrocities. Next, we uncover the horrific history of Paul Schäfer and the infamous Colonia Dignidad.
Number 3. Paul Schäfer, the Hell of Colonia Dignidad. The key event: the former Nazi founded a cult compound in Chile that engaged in systemic child abuse, torture, and human rights violations. The dates: abuses spanned decades. Convicted and sentenced 2006, died in prison April 24, 2010. The crime: child rape, sexual and physical abuse, kidnapping, and complicity in murder. The tale of Paul Schäfer begins not on a holy stage, but in the ruins of post-war Germany. Schäfer was a former Nazi medic and an evangelical preacher who fled Germany in 1961 after being investigated for the sexual abuse of minors. He relocated to a remote valley in southern Chile, where he founded a closed, 16,000-hectare compound he called Colonia Dignidad, the Colony of Dignity. Schäfer created an environment of total, totalitarian control, using religious dogma to enforce isolation, forced labor, and absolute silence. Residents, mostly German immigrants, were cut off from the outside world. Families were separated, with children raised apart from their parents. Severe physical and mental abuse was rampant, enforced by the cult's security detail. Schäfer, known to the residents as the Uncle, El Tío, used his absolute authority to create a sexual tyranny. He systematically targeted and abused the children of the colony, both German and Chilean. The colony's dark activities, however, went far beyond religious abuse. During the brutal dictatorship of General Augusto Pinochet, 1973 to 1990, Colonia Dignidad formed an alliance with the regime's secret police, the DINA. Schäfer's isolated compound served as a secret base for the DINA. The colony was used as a clandestine center for torture, political imprisonment, and the disappearance of Pinochet's opponents.
Schäfer provided the perfect infrastructure for the dictatorship: an isolated location, specialized medical personnel who could prolong torture, and a loyal, silent populace who could guard the secrets. For decades, Schäfer and Colonia Dignidad operated with total impunity, protected by the Chilean military and political elite who benefited from its services. The fall of Pinochet's regime slowly opened the door to justice. The first reports of atrocities, sexual abuse, and disappearances began to leak out. Schäfer, realizing his protection was gone, fled Chile in 1997 and spent 8 years as an international fugitive. His run ended in March 2005 when he was captured in Argentina and extradited back to Chile. The subsequent trials exposed the full horror of Colonia Dignidad. In 2006, a Chilean judge found Schäfer guilty on 20 counts of sexual abuse and 5 counts of child rape, sentencing him to 20 years in prison. He faced further charges, including kidnapping and his role in the human rights abuses of the Pinochet era. Schäfer died in prison in April 2010, having never shown remorse for the decades of terror and exploitation he inflicted on his followers and on the victims of the Chilean dictatorship. The story of Colonia Dignidad stands as a powerful monument to the concept of authority bias, demonstrating how charismatic evil, when combined with political and physical isolation, can transform a religious commune into a human rights nightmare. The crimes of Schäfer were tied to political violence. But another American evangelical, operating an evangelical commune in the U.S., used the exact same tactics of isolation and total control to commit systematic sexual exploitation. He was a flamboyant preacher known for outfitting celebrities, who built his empire on the backs of followers, all of whom lived in terror of the man they called Papa Tony. Next, we uncover the chilling tale of Tony Alamo, the preacher who married children. Number 2. Tony Alamo, or Bernie Hoffman, the celebrity cult leader. The key event: conviction on 10 counts of federal charges for taking young girls across state lines for sex. The date: federal prosecutions in 2009 leading to a long sentence. Died in custody 2017. The crime: transportation of minors for sexual exploitation, bigamy, and tax evasion. Bernie Lazar Hoffman, better known as Tony Alamo, was a flamboyant street preacher who, alongside his wife Susan, built the Tony Alamo Christian Ministries into a massive multi-state evangelical commune during the 1970s and 1980s. Alamo's ministry was a cult built on absolute obedience. His followers were forced to work in the commune's various commercial businesses, including leather jacket shops that supplied custom design gear to celebrities, to support the ministry, which funded Alamo's lavish lifestyle of private planes and mansions. Alamo's followers lived in a state of constant fear. They were told that Papa Tony was a prophet who spoke directly to God. Minor infractions were met with beatings, public shaming, or starvation fasts. They were completely isolated and had no access to outside information or media. After his wife Susan died in 1989, Alamo's control took a dark and criminal turn. He began claiming that God had commanded him to take new wives from within the commune. These marriages were not consensual, and they were specifically targeted at the daughters of loyal followers. Like Warren Jeffs, Alamo saw his prophetic authority as a license to commit statutory rape and bigamy. He married girls as young as 8 and 9 years old in private ceremonies, and then routinely took them across state lines for sexual exploitation. For years, his power allowed him to operate without impunity. He had already served a 4-year sentence in the 1990s for tax evasion, but the deeper, darker crimes against children remained hidden behind the walls of his evangelical fortresses. In the late 2000s, 5 women, All survivors who had escaped the commune came forward. They were now adults, ranging in age from 17 to 33, but they detailed a lifetime of systemic abuse. The federal government relied entirely on the courage of these victims to testify, as there was almost no physical evidence. The women provided emotional, detailed accounts of how Alamo used his position as their spiritual leader to prey on them, sometimes giving them wedding rings when they were still children. The trial took place in Texarkana, Arkansas. Alamo remained defiant, claiming his prosecution was a conspiracy by the Vatican against his brand of Christianity. He was seen falling asleep during testimony and comparing himself to a prophet unjustly jailed for the gospel. In July 2009, a federal jury convicted Tony Alamo on 10 counts of transportation of minors for illegal sexual conduct. The convictions carried a potential sentence of 175 years in prison and massive fines. The conviction brought a small crowd of shouting onlookers outside the courthouse, cheering, "Bye-bye, Bernie," as he was led away. Tony Alamo died in federal prison in May 2017, serving a sentence that confirmed he was not a prophet but a convicted felon who used the cloak of faith to sexually exploit vulnerable children. From the mass murder of Jim Jones to the quiet sexual tyranny of Tony Alamo, we've tracked the dark history of cult leaders. But the final entry on our list is a more modern scandal, a reminder that unchecked authority can corrupt even the most successful mainstream institutions. Our final subject was a powerful megachurch pastor in the U.S. who was brought down not by fraud or prophecy, but by explosive allegations of sexual coercion involving young men. Allegations that were never proven in court because the case was abruptly and mysteriously settled out of court. This settlement left millions of followers with an unanswered question that still haunts the megachurch world today.
Number 1. Eddie Long, The Confidential Settlement. The key event. 4 young men accused the influential megachurch pastor of sexual coercion, leading to a confidential civil settlement. The dates. Allegations went public September 2010. Civil suits settled May 2011. The crime. Sexual coercion alleged, misuse of position alleged, and confidential settlement. Bishop Eddie Long was, for decades, one of the most powerful and visible African-American megachurch pastors in the United States. He was the senior pastor of the New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Lithonia, Georgia, a massive congregation with over 25,000 members. Long was famous for his wealth, his influence, and his commitment to a message of spiritual and personal discipline. He was seen as a moral leader, even receiving personal counsel from high-profile politicians and celebrities. The foundation of his authority was shattered in September 2010. 4 young men, Anthony Flagg, Jamal Paris, Maurice Robinson, and Spencer Legrand, filed civil lawsuits against Bishop Long. Their lawsuits alleged that Long had used his immense influence, position, and financial power to coerce them into sexual relationships during their teenage years and early adulthood. The claims were detailed and specific. They alleged that Long had groomed them, lavished them with attention, gifts, money, trips, and jobs, all before and after they reached the legal age of consent. The suits alleged these actions were used to pressure them into unwanted sexual acts and oral sodomy. The public fallout was immediate and devastating. The man who had preached so forcefully on purity and traditional family values was now accused of using his position to exploit vulnerable young men who viewed him as a father figure or mentor. Bishop Long addressed his congregation, appearing visibly shaken yet defiant. He stood before his church, wearing his characteristic royal robes, and gave a powerful emotional speech to his loyal supporters. He declared, "I've been accused. I am under attack. I am not the man that's being portrayed on the television. This thing I'm going to fight. I feel like David against Goliath, but I've got 5 rocks and I haven't thrown one yet." The congregation rallied around him, supporting his decision to fight the lawsuits in court and clear his name. For months, the case dragged on, dominating national news and dividing the Christian community. Then, in May 2011, came the shocking anticlimax. After several months of intense mediation, Eddie Long and the 4 plaintiffs agreed to a resolution. The civil lawsuits were settled out of court. The terms of the settlement were, and remain, strictly confidential. Both the church spokesman and the lawyer for the plaintiffs issued brief identical statements. The matter has been resolved. The decision was made to bring closure to this matter. They announced that neither side would ever discuss the details, the monetary terms, or the resolution process then or in the future. This move immediately generated a new firestorm of controversy. Why would a man who claimed absolute innocence and promised to fight to clear his name pay an undisclosed sum of money to settle the cases? As one religious commentator noted at the time, it looks like a cover-up. It looks like he did what the Catholic Church has been doing for decades. The settlement left the fundamental questions of his guilt or innocence permanently unresolved in the public eye. While Long continued to preach to a loyal remnant of his congregation until his death from cancer in 2017, the settlement permanently damaged his reputation and leadership effectiveness. The case of Bishop Eddie Long serves as a final reflective lesson that in the modern world of powerful, wealthy megachurches, the pursuit of confidentiality and closure can often trump the pursuit of truth, leaving a final cynical cloud of suspicion hanging over the abuse of spiritual authority. The men on this list, from the gilded fraud of Jim Bakker to the jungle terror of Jim Jones and the dark settlement of Eddie Long, prove a terrifying constant. The most potent deception often wears the mask of faith. They weaponize the highest calling, spirituality, for the lowest goals, greed, power, and exploitation. Their stories aren't just footnotes in criminal history. They are a necessary caution. They teach us that the greatest measure of a spiritual leader is not the size of their congregation or the wealth of their empire, but the transparency of their finances and the vulnerability of the people under their care. The question remains, how many more names will history add to this dark list before the power of the pulpit is truly held to account? Let us know in the comments below which case you found the most shocking, and subscribe for more deep dives into the unseen forces that have shaped our world.